Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing so far? Good, good. I'm going to talk about the housing market outlook, and usually with the housing market outlook, I talk about the economy, but I'm glad Dr. Gerhard and Dr. Mishika talked about the economy, so I can spend more time on the housing market outlook. But I still do want to spend a couple minutes on the housing market outlook, or the economy. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can. There you go. So here's what I'm going to talk about. For the next couple minutes or so, I'll spend a little bit of time to talk about the economy, just a couple minutes, because we have some interesting environment, to say the least. And then I will jump right into the housing market. I will talk about the national numbers, give you some information about the state, and then I'll go into Kern County, and then wrap it up with the forecast. And of course, I usually leave the forecast at the very end because I don't want people to stay. I don't want people to leave until the very end, but this is a long half-day program, so I don't really need to worry about that, but I'll leave that at the very end. So first, a quick glance at the economy. Here's a quick glance. I have the GDP number up and the consumption and unemployment. Take a look at the GDP number. It's usually released on a quarterly basis. And so the last number that we had was from fourth quarter of 2016, and it's a 1.9%. Now, not exactly what 1.9% is. Usually, when you're in an economy and the economy is growing, and let's say after recessions, we expect a little bit more than 3%, maybe 4 or 5%. But in the last, say, 6-7 years after the recessions, we haven't really had an annual number of over 3%. We have been chugging along with about 1.5%, 2% or so. 1.9%, if you compare it to the last few years, it actually has been right around there. It's not robust, but we'll live with that. And a lot of the GDP growth is because of consumption, because of consumer spending. There are a few components of the GDP, but consumer spending is a big part of it. That means, things that you buy on, buying your iPad, buying your iPhone, those are consumer spending as well. And consumer spending has been pretty decent with a 3% increase from in the fourth quarter. That's because unemployment rate at the national level is at a pretty decent level at 4.7. So exactly what 4.7 is, take a look at some of the economists' perspective. Usually, at full employment, it's around below 5%, 4.8% or so. So 4.7 is pretty decent at the national level, and it has been fluctuating. You might see 4.8, 4.9 in the next upcoming months or so. But it's a pretty decent number, and the job growth is as a somewhat, I wouldn't necessarily say robust. Again, it's more like chugging along, a decent number to have, though. And another big part of it, which affect the housing market also, is the mortgage rates. Mortgage rates is important because it's what the cost is for people to borrow, whether it be for a loan, for a house, or for doing business. So the lower the interest rate, usually that means people can borrow at a lower cost. That means people can actually possibly make more profit if they were to have a successful business. So mortgage rates have been staying very low. Mortgage rates has been at around, for the last 5-6 years, has been at around below 5%. In the last year or so, it actually had been below 4% for quite some time. Anybody remember what it was for mortgage rates or 30-year fixed rates back in 1980s? In the teens? 15, 16. I don't have the chart here that shows 15, 16. For a lot of millennials, they probably would think, wow, 5% is very high. But, go back to 1980s, go back to 1990s, you'll see that, that's actually not too bad. And 4% is actually not too bad. But something happened in November. After the election, of course, the outcome was a little surprising for many people. And because of the surprising outcome, interest rate jumped. The surprising outcome led to increase in interest rate because of the fact that the new president possibly could trigger more inflation. And inflation, and I'll repeat inflation a few more times actually, to let you know how interest rate actually would be affected by inflation. But inflation led to a little bit of an increase in interest rate. After the election, interest rate actually jumped, 30-year fixed rate actually jumped about 30 to 40 basis point. Towards the end of the year, it actually reached 4.3% for 30-year fixed rate as compared to 3.5 in the early November. And that's because of people anticipating inflation. Recently, it actually tamed down a little bit to about 4.15, 4.2%. And we'll talk more about that. So I want to give you another slide on the post-election uncertainty, and that should wrap up the economy part of it. These are some of the things that might have direct impact on the housing market that might cause us some uncertainty. For example, the economic stimulus package. These are things that have been talked about, in the media a lot. Economic stimulus package. In the past years, 10 years, 15 years or so, or since after the recessions, we actually have been receiving mostly the monetary stimulus, but we haven't really received a lot of fiscal stimulus. Fiscal stimulus is basically the government spending more money into the economy, putting money in the economy. And so fiscal stimulus is something that has been talked about, I believe. It will be is anticipated to have about $1 trillion spent over the course of 10 years. That would actually be good to the economy, but keep in mind, if the economy actually is in full employment, that actually could lead to a little bit of wage growth, and wage growth is a good thing mostly, but when you have full employment, it might actually lead to a little bit of overheating. And so what happened is the Federal Reserve usually put increased interest rate to kind of slow things down a little bit. So inflation, again, will lead to an interest rate increase. Dodd-Frank, the financial regulation, has been talked about a lot. Dismantling Dodd-Frank would lead to more loosening lending standards, but also will lead to a little bit of a risk of possibly creating another mortgage mortgage bubble and maybe housing bubble. Reform of GSE, privatizing of the GSEs. Again, privatizing actually could create some risk for lenders, which also could lead to increase in interest rates, possibly lead to about 50 to 60 basis point increase in the current interest rate. Trade policy and some of the wild card like healthcare, we kind of talked about it earlier, and deportation and immigration policies. Those are some wild cards that might actually affect the economy, whether it could be on the good side, but it also could have some negative impact on the economy. So let's jump right into the housing market outlook. Let me give you a national outlook. Again, it's going to be very short on the national numbers and the state number, and then I'll go into the Kern County number. Here's some numbers at the national level. At a national level, if you take a look at the national number as compared to some of the region numbers, it seems to be actually doing decent with a 3.7% increase. I only have 1 month of data for January, but it's actually an increase of 3.7%. If you take a look at the other regions, the only regions that actually show a slight decline is Midwest. Northeast, South, and West. West is part of, California is part of the West, is actually growing at a pretty decent rate of 8.7% in terms of sales. And this is part of the reason why we have increase in sales. What do you need? Why do you have more home sales? Usually because there is an increase in demand, right? Why do you have increase in demand? Usually because people are moving out or people forming households. If you have more households being formed, then you need housing units. You need people need to either rent a place or buy a place to live. If they have, of course, that means they have more money. Take a look at the slide here. This is a slide that shows household formation. In terms of household formation, how many increase in household formation that we have in 2015? We have 1.7 million. That's a very high number relative to the last 10 years or so. In 2016, we actually dropped slightly to 1.1 million, but it's still a very decent number as compared to the last few years. So 1.1 million is not bad. That means we do have housing demand. We have housing being formed, and partly because of what I showed earlier, the labor market. The labor market is actually doing okay, at the national level. And if you take a look at the housing sentiment. This is a survey done by Fannie Mae, suggests that people do want to buy a home. If you take a look at the line, going back to, I think, can't really see that far, but it has been trending up. Even though it is not at the highest level right now, it's actually staying at a high level relative to the past years. So people do want to buy. But here's the thing, a little bit of Econ 101, when you talk about economics, you talk about supply and demand, right? So I show you the demand side. We have some household formation. We have some housing demand. But at the same time, if you take a look at the supply side, this is the number of active listings. So new listings being listed on the multiple listing service. Multiple listing actually went down, has been going down for quite some time since 2012. In fact, for February, it actually went down by 11.4%. So when you have supply actually dropping down, that means you need, people might be competing for homes if you have a lot of demand. Here's a chart on home prices. When you have an imbalance between supply and demand, if you have more people demanding but you don't have enough supply, usually that leads to some upward pressure on prices. And that's what happened at the national level. In the US, it actually has been increasing by 7.3%. Some other areas are actually increasing less, but in the West, it's right on par at the national level. So let's take a look at California a little bit closer to home. California operates a little differently compared to the nation as a whole. It has a higher home prices, but let's talk about sales first. Sales, it is currently at 400,500. This is the latest number that we have. We just released our February numbers, so you can see some numbers from our website and on in the news as well. If you use 400,000 as a benchmark, we actually have been above that benchmark for the 11th consecutive month, which is not too bad. On a year-to-date basis, looking at just the first couple months compared to last year, we're actually up by 4.7%. And it has a lot to do with the demand that I mentioned earlier. I don't have the demand slide, housing demand slide for the state, but it has a lot to do with the demand because of household formations and things like that. But to also take a look at this slide, the number on the right-hand side shows a quarterly number. And the number on the left-hand side showed the monthly number. And then 2016, I'm going back to 2016, 2016 would have actually resulted in a loss in sales when compared to 2015, if not because of the last 3 months of the year. Last 3 months of the year actually showed some improvement. The red bars significantly increased in the last 3 months of 2016, and that has a lot to do with interest rates. People anticipated that interest rate will increase. The Federal Reserve will increase interest rate in December. So a lot of people actually jumped in to buy homes in the last quarter, leading to an increase in the 2016 number. That carried forward in 2017, the first 2 months. We're seeing a little bit of increase in sales, partly because people are taking advantage of the low interest rate, anticipating that there will be increase in the 30-year fixed rate shortly. Before we go into more detail on interest rates and supply and how it affects the market, let's take a look at the supply side for the state. Supply side for the state actually is at 4.7 months. It's hard to look at what 4.7 months is, but there is a long-term monthly number. Anybody know how many months of supply we should have in a normal market? Any wild guess? 6 is right. Not as wild, actually. 6.5 months of inventory is about right. And currently we're at 4.7. And someone could argue that we're currently at 4 months right now. Sorry, and we have been consistently below that 6 months for quite some time. And maybe this should be considered the new normal. But I can guarantee you that even though we're at 4 months right now, when we go into the spring home buying season, for the state level, it probably will go down to about 3 months or so, which is very, very tight. There are reasons why people are not buying or not putting their house on the market, And here are some reasons. One of the big reasons that I put up on top is the demographic shift. I think we mentioned a little bit about millennial earlier. And there are a lot of baby boomers. Baby boomers are moving into the group of age of 55 to 60. When you're in your 55, 60s, you tend to move less. When you're in your 35 and 40, you want a bigger house, you want to move because of your kids wanting your kids to go to a better school. So you move more often. But when you have a lot of people moving into the 55, 60 age group, and they're not moving as much, that's why we're seeing the slide on the left-hand side. The number of sellers who put up their homes on the market, before selling it, they stayed there for, it used to be 7 years. But now, more and more people stay at their home a little longer as compared to before. And that's because they don't necessarily have to move as much. There are other reasons as well. These are some of the financial reasons. If you lock in a rate at 3.5, and you don't know that back in the 1980s, interest rate was at 18, you would think, wow, I'm not going to move. It's 4.5% or 5% interest rates. So they don't move. And property tax is another reason. Capital gain, if you stay in a home for over 20, 25 years and you gain some capital gain, you may not necessarily want to move because you don't want to pay taxes. Here's another slide that shows you why boomers are not moving or substantiate why baby boomers are not moving. If you take a look at the red bar, those should all add up to 100%. That's the distribution of when people move. And if you look at the last 3 bars, 2000 to 2013, only 30% of boomers actually moved in those 15 years. That means 70% of those, many of those are homeowners, did not move in 2000 and in the last 15 years. And also you can say, well, you can argue we can build more. Yes, we can build more, but we haven't been building more at the state level. At the state level, if you look at the household growth, typically we expect 165,000 households, but then we actually have been building less than that. Actually, we have been building 62,000 less every single year for the last 10 years or so, maybe even more. So we're significantly below. And when you have more demand than supply, you have increase in home prices. Home prices actually has been increasing by about 7.6% with the latest data. Last year, it increased by about 5%. This year, we do expect the increase in price to be even higher. I'm going to go up a little faster. Housing affordability, of course, when you have home prices rising, you have housing affordability issue. It dropped. If you look at the numbers on the right-hand side where it says quarterly, we actually has dropped for the housing affordability index. It dropped from about 51%, meaning 51% used to be able to afford a median price home. Now only 31% in 2016. And home ownership also dropped. Now let's turn our attention to Kern County. I'm using the same graph on the left-hand side, which shows you home ownership rate. Home ownership has been dropping at the national and the state level. For the state level, it actually dropped from about 61% to about 53%. If you take a look at Kern County also dropped. Kern County dropped from 61.5% to right around 55%. Now, I said earlier, home ownership dropped partly because of maybe supply that pushed up home prices, maybe because of affordability. For Kern County, it's a little different. Supply issue, as you will see later on, it's not as big of an issue. First, let's take a look at the demand side. Kern County demand household formation, again, using household formation as the demand indicator. Household formation, in the long run, Kern County usually has about 3,000. Going back to 1992, the long run average is about 3,000. But in the last few years, household formation actually is below that number. It's only about 1,600, or 1,600 for the last few years. And it has a lot to do with the employment conditions, economic conditions in Kern County. Home sales, as far as sales-wise, it actually has been, last year, if you look at the year as a whole, it's actually dropped 3.1%. It's averaging about 6,000 in the last few years. Didn't really change that much. Again, it has a lot to do with, in the last couple of years, has to do with economic conditions. when you have labor market, when you have unemployment at an elevated level because of the oil and the gas industry, of course, it affects people's money in their pocket. They don't necessarily, may not have the means to actually move out or rent or purchase a property. As far as home sales is concerned, the latest statistics shows us that actually the first couple months, we had a drop in sales about 11% compared to last year. Now, it looks like a sizable drop right now, but I do believe that as the economy continued to improve in Kern County, as we started seeing some economic improvement, both at the national and state level, we'll see some improvement in the Kern County as well. I do believe that oil prices probably will be stabilized and maybe even go up a little bit more. Hopefully that will help the economy, and that should help the housing market in Kern County for the rest of the year. And as far as price is concerned, you can see that as far as price is concerned, take a look at the chart on the right-hand side again, the one with the bar that says the annual number, the annual figures at the bottom. 2016 actually shows an increase. I don't know why it's showing a white bar right there, but 2016 actually shows an increase of 3.1% as compared to last year, or compared to 2015, meaning home prices continue to increase. Home prices continue to increase maybe at a slightly lower level compared to the state and the national level, but it's continuing to increase. But it seems like it's leveling off, though. If you look at the left-hand side slide, it seems to be leveling off with only a very, very tiny increase on a monthly basis. I do believe, again, that home prices will continue to increase. It's probably going to be at a small single digit in 2016 for Kern County, though. Supply is not as big of a concern in Kern County. Supply, in terms of existing homes, actually shows an increase in the last 3 months, but it has something to do with seasonality. Usually at the end of the year or beginning of the year, we don't have as many sales, so the months of supply tend to increase a little bit. Recently, it is at 4.7 months. I mentioned earlier, testing your memory a little bit, California's long-run average month of supply is about what? 6.5. Right now, it's 4.7 months for Kern County, but Kern County's average is actually not 6. The long-run average for Kern County is about 5.4, but if you take a look at only the last 10 years, it's only about 4 months. So supply side is not the issue, not as big of an issue for Kern County, especially when you take a look at the construction. I mentioned earlier, you look at the housing formation slide earlier for Kern County. Again, testing your memory a little bit. The household formation for Kern County is about what number right now? 1,600? Take a look at the number here I have on screen. For 2016, Kern County's permits is about 2,235, meaning we're building more than the household formation that we're seeing in the housing demand right now in Kern County. So supply is not that big of an issue. It did drop from last year, 8.4%, but it seems like supply side should not be too concerned about that. And if supply side is not an issue, then housing affordability should not be as big of an issue. And that is really the case, because if you take a look at the median price, I don't have the median price up, I have it back there. Median price for Kern County for existing home is right around $200,000, a little bit less than $200,000. And when you measure that against the housing affordability, when you measure that against the state and as well as some of the other counties, Kern County is very affordable. It is currently at around 55%, meaning 55% of all households can afford to buy a home in Kern County. And here's a slide that might be, it's interesting to look at. I mentioned about interest rates. Now, I'm not putting up an interest rate of 18% up here because it's way over the chart. But I only show you the interest rate change, what is going to happen to people who are buying home, if we have a change in interest rate by, say, 50 basis point or 100 basis point. So let's say we're at 4% right now, which is at 4%, your monthly premium is about $862 for a median price home. At that rate, if we actually see an increase of 50 basis point, we're seeing an increase of about $110 per month, for a homeowner. What does that mean in terms of income? You will need, if it jumped from 4% to say 50 basis point, I'm sorry, I think I mentioned $110. That was for an increase of 100 basis point. But if you see a 50 basis point increase from 4% to 4.5%, that means you need to increase your income from about $44,800 to $47,000. But if it increased by 100 basis point, it will increase by about $4,000 or so. We may, I mean, there might, as I said earlier, there will be wage growth, but can anyone guarantee that they will probably have an increase in wage by about $4,000? Can you tell your boss that I need a 5% increase by the end of the year? Can't do that. So that, of course, affects housing affordability, but housing affordability will drop about 4% if we actually have an increase of 100 basis point. So to wrap it up, I have a few slides, I have a couple slides by city. Here are the median price for Kern County, some of the cities in Kern County. Bakersfield make up the big bulk of all sales. As far as price is concerned, you'll see that there are some increases and some fluctuation as well. As far as California City, it shows a significant increase, but that's partly because of small observations. But all in all, we see some increase. In Rosamond, we see a 16.2% increase in the first month. Wasco, we see a 4.8%. As far as sales, we also see some increasing, this encouraging sign. Bakersfield did drop about 4.1% though. Now let's wrap it up with the forecast. I have a California forecast. C.A.R. produced a California forecast. I don't have a slide for a Kern County forecast, but I'll give you my take on that. Take a look at the state number. The state number, as far as sales is concerned, we're just edging out 2016 by a little bit. Take a look at the number there. As far as single-family homes, we will be up by 0.8%. And price, though, median price, we do expect median price to increase by 4.6% this year. A little bit less than last year, but it's going to be an increase of 4.6%. And that's because of a couple things. We expect an increase in interest rate to 4.4%. It might actually be even more than that. Because originally it was going to be about 2 to 3 times of increase in interest rates this year, but it's more likely going to be about 4 to 5 times, each time with about 25 basis point. If that is the case, we're going to see a 75 basis point increase from this point on. So we might actually see 5% 30-year fixed rate at the end of the year. And for Kern County, I show a slide earlier that shows currently we have a drop of 11%. I do believe that the economy is going to pick up. We probably will have more sales increase towards the end of the year, meaning most likely we will still experience a drop of sales this year, but it's not going to be that much. It's going to be about maybe 4 or 5% drop. That's because we are having a rising interest rate environment and the political uncertainty. And also, as far as price is concerned, it may not show a 4% increase in price. It's going to show maybe about a 2% increase in price in Kern County. And supply and affordability will remain an issue for the state and the nation as a whole, but not so much for the county. And that wraps up the presentation. I know it's a little hard to look at my email address on there, but it's basically just my name, oscarw@car.org. If you have any questions, you can definitely send me an email. All right, thank you very much.